What we folks, as you saw, Bob Lane, and you can look at his bio, you'll find out why he's got such tremendous background. We're actually going to move into the compliance after COVID-19, and Derek's going to manage this session. We've got two people that Derek will introduce. Sylvia Kingsmill, who runs the national partnership at KPMG. She's responsible for regulatory privacy information, risk consulting, and Deborah, who you see already on the screen, and she's the chief privacy officer for Rogers. So take it away. I think Sylvia is somewhere there. I'm sure I'd seen her. Oh, there we go. So great to have you guys. Let me get out and stop share so you've got the whole screen to yourselves. And I will get out of it. Okay, take it away, Bob. I
lost the screen there somehow. Let me just, there it is. Good afternoon, ladies, and welcome. We're gonna talk about compliance. You know, much of the focus has been a balance of, you know, looking past and what's happened in the spaces, and but what we'd like to try to do is look forward. And from what I can see, and I could be completely wrong, but companies are you know, I think I could probably count on one hand the number of Canadian companies that are truly and fully privacy and compliant. I don't think there's many that could actually say they've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, or even gone above and beyond. And you know, we like to say in the compliance that it's the minimum standard. I know, Deb, that you frequently talk about the brand reputation and the value that it is. That's the real nugget in all of this. It's not checking boxes and you know, going through the process of being compliant. It's actually thinking through your privacy policies and procedures and your security side of it, that your customers are respected and taken care of in the process. And I truly believe, and I said this on the privacy panel this morning, that if you do that, it's somehow privacy just clicks and works. By way of introduction, Deborah Evans is the Chief Privacy Officer for Rogers. Been in the business a while. How long, Deborah? 12 years?
I've been with Rogers 12 years, yeah.
And pretty much always working in privacy, correct?
Consumer issues, privacy being a subset of that, yes, correct.
Awesome. A great place to come from in terms. I'm a kind of a rare breed in the privacy space, in that I come from marketing. You know, I owned my own ad agency in the 90s, and you know, what's that got to do with privacy? Well, I take the approach, you must implement it. So it's all about implementation. It's all about operationalizing these privacy laws or these standards, or as you say, taking care of the customer. And Sylvia Kingsmill, welcome. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. Sylvia is a very well respected, is the national partner for privacy and risk management for KPMG, with a pretty rich background in risk management. So while you come to the privacy, you know, specialty, point of view. So I think what we'd like to do is just get into some questions here and start. What are the biggest drivers of change for organizations managing their customers' privacy? Deborah, I'll maybe throw that one to you first.
Yeah, big topic to lead off with. So I think what's important is just, you know, if we take a step back and we're in more of a digital world now. Everything's being driven by data, and there's sort of the concept of monetizing data versus data ownership. So all of these things are sort of swirling around, and more apps are generating personal information and data. So that's more and more businesses are becoming stewards of that data. And then you have that with a greater challenge of customer engagement. So I would say in the last 5 years, we've seen a shift, and a lot of the shift has been through external things that are happening in the world. You're seeing customers now not blindly accepting terms of services and not blindly accepting privacy policies. And they're digging in and they're looking at what that means. I mean, that doesn't always happen. You know, you see a lot of things when you accept apps and you have an app for getting your weather and you have to give them access to your camera. And then, you know, so there's all these things that are happening. And then, so as digital adoption advances, consumers get more engaged, and you need to have sort of more of an education. So the real challenge, particularly when you operationalize it at the business level, is finding that right balance between having the data, protecting and safeguarding the data, being used to maybe take it de-identification, anonymization, aggregation. They're all used as interchangeable words in the privacy world these days, particularly at the consumer level, but trying to figure out the right balance between taking something that has stripped all the personal identifiers to be able to use it for your business, whether that's to improve the customer experience, for analytics. You know, there are businesses obviously out there that make their business of monetizing that de-identified, anonymized information. So all of that happening. And then it's also trying to get the right balance between the consumer education, because while consumers are generating far more data, they're also creating greater risks for themselves. You know, we still see a lot of secondary security breaches as an example, where people have used the same password on every single website, and then maybe that gets exposed through a secondary breach, and then they're reaching out to you saying, oh, have you had a breach? My information's out there. Or they're, you know, Facebook and all these social media platforms have their own advantages, but then people are happily like, I'm just going to put my date of birth here. I'm just going to tell you everything about me here, right here, which is, you know, it's great, but put some privacy controls around that. So I think that really, I mean, I've kind of gone around this, but for us as a business, I think the biggest driver for us is just finding that right balance between customer engagement and doing the right thing for your customer. I don't know,
Awesome.
Sylvia, do you think?
Yeah.
Deborah, you know, the classic question is, well, what could they possibly do with just my name and my email address? A lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Visually more important than ever now.
Yeah. No kidding. No kidding. When it comes to the privacy regulators, so what lessons can we apply in compliance? You know, you've had a fair amount of dealings with the privacy regulators.
Absolutely. All sorts of monumental privacy breaches. So the first lesson learned, I can say, it's not just about compliance. It really is about managing their expectations. And a cyber breach is a perfect opportunity to attract additional regulatory scrutiny about your overall health and hygiene for your privacy program end to end. Contrary to popular belief, they're not going to do that black letter of the law, tick the box, you know, do you have this, do you have that, because, you know, GDPR, or PPSS says that you must comply. Really, as part of their investigation, they're going to ask for a number of things that's not written into the law, and they're going to want everything to be well documented to prove that it exists. And the first thing that they typically ask for, based on my experience, is a documented governance model and accountability structure with reporting lines. So they ask who reports into whom and where does privacy sit. And they really want to see this because I believe privacy deserves a lot more visibility, and that makes a whole world of difference in terms of where the privacy function sits and where it rolls up into and what level the privacy function is. And so what I've seen in practice is a lot of these entities are scrambling at the last minute to draw up these fancy diagrams. So the bottom line is that they're going to inspect what they expect And there is a lot of regulatory guidance that we typically tell our clients to go and read and build that into their privacy compliance programs, simply because regulatory expectations are way more important than the black letter of the law. The law doesn't evolve quickly enough with technology and expectations and the threat landscape and industry best practices. So it's not enough just to go to the law. It really is important to understand regulatory expectations, to read the guidance documents, and then embed all those practices into a holistic risk assessment framework with controls and key activities that are going to demonstrate that you're actually doing that. The second lesson is you have to have a really coordinated and streamlined approach to responding to the regulators. And that really also requires increased internal communication. Depending on the magnitude of the breach, you might actually have to dedicate an internal PMO to manage all of this, because then it becomes your day job, which is unfortunate. And I've seen a lot of organizations underestimate the amount of time you're going to end up spending with the regulator to answer their demand, and they have a lot of questions. And the submission itself needs a lot of time and coordination, because it requires different people to contribute to the regulatory submission. So privacy isn't just the chief privacy officer's job, and Deborah will probably confirm that. It is a multidisciplinary approach to protecting information, which requires cyber, data management, legal, compliance teams, risk management, and even the business, right? They're the ones who are managing the privacy risk on the front lines day to day. So the time and effort spent on the submission in terms of how you respond to the regulator is going to depend on how well your privacy program is documented. And I have yet to see a very mature program that has all of the, T's crossed, you said, and the I's dotted. And don't forget the revision cycles required to be able to package it all up and embed all of the documents to prove that what you're saying actually exists, right? You got to demonstrate accountability and compliance. And it's absolutely okay to ask for extensions, but make no mistake, they're going to hold you to that timeline. They're very strict with that, and they don't even care if you need to work over Christmas. I've been there. Right.
Absolutely.
With U.S. regulators and with Canadian regulators, it's not fun. And please do note that they will keep on bugging and asking until they get what they want. Their mandate is to, protect citizens and individuals' privacy rights. So you can't hide under privilege for all that time, because they'll keep on nagging and nagging. The third lesson, if I still have time, is
you do.
Okay. So how all that time and expense involved in dealing with the regulators ex post facto could simply be avoided if you're regularly checking your privacy risk posture through audits or internal reviews that result in actionable plans and roadmaps where you can implement, your residual risks in a way that makes sense to the enterprise, because it's nice to have a roadmap and then you do nothing about it because no one understands how to implement the recommendations. And companies that get into the most trouble are the ones who have absolutely nothing in place to show due diligence, right? So there needs to be a commitment to want to ameliorate your privacy risk posture, and that can only come through regular monitoring and assessments. You should know that it'll be a long journey ahead if, in fact, you do get compromised, because the regulators will keep on coming back to do a checkup on whether or not the risk exposures have been mitigated, and if people's privacy rights are being respected. And then it's even a longer journey to then go and rebuild that brand and your reputation, because people never forget. They never forget that story about so-and-so that's been breached, and it becomes a topic of conversation. So it is a very long journey of remediation ahead. So I guess what I'm trying to say, use your common sense. A lot of the common privacy pitfalls can be easily avoided if you're proactively managing the risk through a compliance program that is risk-focused and not just a compliance exercise. Like you said, Derek, it's not a tick the box. It really isn't, and you don't want to find that out through a regulatory investigation and a privacy breach.
Right.
It's interesting,
Right.
Sylvia. there's two things that you said there. Well, actually three that really resonate with me as a chief privacy officer. But one is managing your relationship with the regulator shouldn't just be when you're in a compliance issue. I have regular check-ins. I just, you know, we're here in Canada, so I'm in Ottawa on the regular, well, not now, but regularly I'm in Ottawa, and I'm just calling up the people that we deal with, whether it be at the CRTC or the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and just having a coffee. We're not even talking about open files, because obviously we're not, but it's about developing that rapport with them so that if you need to ask for an extension, they're a little bit more agreeable, or you need to go and be harder and firmer with them on something, they're a little bit more agreeable because they know that you're taking things seriously. You've developed a relationship. So I think that it's that human part of your compliance model that's equally as important than really then getting into a battle with your regulator and they've never spoken to you before, they've never had any dealings with you, and you just seem adversarial right out the gate. Right. That really resonated with me. And also, you mentioned audits, and I laugh because I am audited regularly by internal audit. Everyone gets our audit, and they get nervous, and I'm all, it's fine, it's good. I welcome internal audit to come because it's a pulse check. It's making sure that compliance is there. I mean, don't get me wrong, I argue with them a lot, and I make them rewrite some of their final reports before it sees the light of day. But we have a good relationship of that, and I love it. Like, I think probably in the last year I've been audited, or last 2 years, 5 times on various aspects of it, be my breach management, accountability, CASL, some small component, or someone else is being audited and it has a privacy compliance component where they're meeting with me and they're, you know, I don't take any tasks when I'm not being audited, but I think that really helps too. It helps mature your privacy program. People shouldn't be afraid of internal audit. I mean, they can be your best. Yes, they can be your worst enemy, but they can also be your best friend to put pressure on the business and the operational teams to do something and think of privacy outside of the compliance risk management. And they just sort of think of it as second nature.
If they think of it as a business issue, and if I may comment, sorry, Derek.
No, that's
the first thing about establishing a relationship, yes, it's a good idea to establish a really good relationship with your regulator and your internal audit function, and never befriend a regulator during the breach. It's a nightmare. So I agree with you on that one. And the second point I wanted to make in terms of not being afraid of risk assessments and internal audits, I think that it gets easier as time goes on, because we encourage a comply once, a test too many approach. A lot of the requirements in different privacy laws and other regulations actually are the same. So it's good to do a harmonization exercise to see what controls you have in place that you comply once with, that you can attest compliance with to the many disparate legal sources that you need to be compliant with. So that's really important. And never be afraid to actually go to a regulator with an idea that you have in digital, because they love to see the proactive risk management thinking upfront, and they really love to give you guidance and support in terms of checking your blind spots. You know, have you thought of this or that? Because by the time you roll it out, it's not a good spot to be in when the regulator's asking you for a report ex post facto and they say, no, sorry, you need to retrofit the system or this control or that control because you just didn't come knock on our door and talk to us. So I would wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said, Deborah.
Yeah. One of the things, you know, one of the observations that I had is the there's a distinction between having consent. For example, under CASL, Deborah, there's most clients talk about having consent, and I always talk about proving consent, because to your point earlier, Sylvia, if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. And I'm also shocked how many times we engage with fairly large, have no document procedures in any of these areas of privacy or CASL. It's kind of mind-boggling, because it's one of the elements of any compliant program is documentation and staff training.
Evidence.
Right. Yeah, prove it.
I think what you see when you're talking about the demonstrating compliance, improving your compliance, and speaking from a large organization. So we obviously have the large top side of like, these are the big bucket things. And then on occasion, we will be digging into something and we will see, you know, this subset 5 layers down could really use a standalone policy. So, I mean, over the last 5 years, we've been doing a lot to enhance our privacy management program. We've always had one, but as someone new maybe joins the team or is looking at something, and then we're looking at something differently, we're like, why don't we have a policy or some sort of one-pager that governs that small thread, that when you're building out your compliance management, particularly for privacy and CASL, you look at the big buckets. You're like, consent, retention, this, that, and then you get down, and like I'm saying, you're 5, 6 layers into your program, you're like, oh, you know what, that could use something right there. So it's also that about like the evergreening. You don't just build a program and then you're like, oh, I'm done, I have my program. You always have to be coming back and looking at it. And I know, I mean, in the whole world of privacy, we speak a lot about privacy by design, which really, I actually don't think privacy by design is nothing novel. It's great, don't get me wrong, but it's actually basic compliance project management. When you're onboarding a new project, you've got your list of people you talk to, finance, legal, risk, blah, blah, blah. There should be a box there that is just automatically privacy, because it is one of those things. And then, I mean, I know people diffuse it differently. In our organization, privacy captures anything that's related to consent. So we have pure privacy law compliance. My team manages CASL compliance. And then we also, under the CRTC, the unsolicited telecommunication rules, we manage everything around ADADs, do not call, all of that, because that also has a consent component. So I think it's really depending on how you've structured things in a company, and Sylvia touched on this too, but it is collaborative, but depending on how you've structured things in companies, things fall off. Like, I'm in the regulatory group, so sometimes someone's like, well, I consulted with regulatory. Sure, you know, the telecom regulatory person you did, or the broadcasting regulatory, but did you speak to me about CASL? And we're a small organization, so everyone can watch out for each other, and someone will be asked about maybe 911 compliance, and they'll say, oh, that's fine, but you're sending out this message. Have you thoughts talk to Deborah about CASL compliance? So it's fine, but in large organizations, when things are diffused, that's when there can be breakdowns in compliance and risk management. So that if you're not sort of following what Sylvia said, of that cross-functional collaboration across your orgs, sometimes gaps start to, I never call them gaps, I call them opportunities for improvement. Opportunities for improvement start to present themselves.
Absolutely.
You know, I mentioned in the one of the earlier sessions with Bashir, when he was at Visa, risk sat outside of any of the silos of the business. And I believe privacy is parking itself over there with risk, where it's got a direct line to the board or the chairman, rather than being a function within a particular department, because it crosses over. Security. We talked this morning about security and privacy being the front and the back of the hand. You can't do anything privacy that doesn't affect security, and vice versa. And
absolutely.
You know, when Bashir ran risk management for Visa International, he didn't report to any VP or CEO. He reported to the chairman, and his job was to find areas of risks and clean them up. And I think privacy is beginning, you know, I don't know what you see, Sylvia, but privacy is beginning to get parked out there with risk management, I think.
Absolutely.
In organizations.
I've seen a big shift where years ago, privacy was a duty or a job for legal counsel, and privacy
almost
sit with exclusively with
clerical. Almost clerical. Yeah.
clerical.
Yeah.
And it was a tick the box. Everyone was just getting used to understanding the requirements, right? And no one really turned their mind to how to operationalize it, because most laws aren't very prescriptive, right? So every company entity is left to their own devices to figure out, okay, well, how are you going to actually draft a process and training and awareness that supports the legal requirement through, controls and criteria. So it used to sit with legal, but now I'm seeing this big shift where privacy sits in risk. It sits in compliance. I know within financial institutions, it most often than not sits within the second line, which is the compliance teams or the risk teams. And there is a huge effort underway, especially at these brick and mortar companies and institutions, to break the silos and collaborate, because the most important strategic asset everyone's trying to protect is their data, right? And monetizing the data could actually be much more effective if security enables privacy through, again, the same, comply once, attest to many sort of approaches to risk management. So absolutely, and also GDPR inspired different reporting lines where, privacy reported into legal. Now it's being elevated to the board level. So you're absolutely right. There's an upward trend for privacy officers to report to higher levels of executive management. And that, I believe, truly helps to give visibility to enterprise-wide risk, because when I used to work with the American banks and the American regulators, and over there they got it really figured out. It's about managing expectations, and when the regulator says jump, they say how high, and they do a lot of examinations. And one of the expectations through the outcome of the regulatory exam was to devise an enterprise-wide approach to privacy reporting, where under the GLBA, which is what regulates financial institutions in America, the reporting of privacy risk had to be done on an annual basis to the board. But what wasn't devised yet was an operational approach to understand, how does the risk look like at the line of business level, and then how does that roll up to an enterprise-wide level so that you're managing risk across the enterprise with appropriate visibility, and then the remediation plan to be able to ensure that the risk is properly mitigated. I think that's a practice that I've just seen trickle up into Canada more recently, more than ever. And it goes back to what you're saying, Derek. It's about where privacy sits. It's about the collaboration efforts that Deborah spoke to, and it's about the reporting lines.
Awesome. One of the things that I noticed is over, since the digital revolution has started, let's call it the mid 90s or the late 90s, where the use of data across social media, et cetera, I think somewhere along the line we parked our ethics collectively as a business community. We got caught up in the technology, and we forgot to be, do the right, and I wonder what that is going to look like after COVID. Are we going to get back to the basics where we ask, not can we do that, but should we do that? Deborah, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that as businesses, particularly businesses that want to take a leadership role in whatever their sector is, you have to look at things about, you're right, doing the right thing, but how can I enable my business to do whatever it is with data? We've talked a little bit about data monetization, and fine, that's not the worst thing in the world to happen, but the way to get to data monetization, because we've seen so much happening that have been practices around data monetization that has made society generally feel uncomfortable, is to look at it always at not even putting yourself, but put yourself in that customer shoe. What is the right thing? If you build that trust, it's going to make your customers, they're not going to question it. They're not going to think, well, why are you doing this? It's just going to be second nature to them. And I think that, it's a continuum, because not everyone's going to look at it that way. For us as a company, we're all about, trying to put the customer first. So, that's what you have to do. So you're building that trust, and when you let people know that you're that steward of their data, like customers are entrusting their organizations with a lot of personal information. Again, it's a continuum on who thinks what is sensitive. But if you're trusting people with that, and then you can demonstrate that they should think of you as a partner and a steward, and that you're going to do the right thing, then I think it's easier to make those harder sells, if you will. I use that word loosely. I mean, but then I think of that and I was like, well, how is COVID going to affect that? So, I mean, obviously we've seen through COVID, there's a lot of distrust that is coming back in with customers, because let's just be very clear, fraudsters have been working overtime during these last 4 months to get their hands on whatever they can. We've seen here in Canada, there's been a lot of letters and scams around the government support that have been going out, and a lot of things have been going. There's been an explosion of phishing, and I'm learning all these different ones. There's phishing and there's phishing and there's all of these. They're all sound very much the same to me. But
is Revenue Canada after you too?
All the time. I mean, multiple times they call me to tell me they're going to suspend my insurance number
and
if I don't
put you in jail. And
yeah. Almost like they're working overtime, because I mean, I don't know why, or they're just seeing that people are maybe a little bit more
the guard's down.
Because people are feeling more susceptible to other things, and they're worried about other things, but then you've also got the ones that are a little bit more vigilant now, because they are worried less because they're at home and they're thinking more about things. So it's sort of, where will that balance come from COVID? And I think that it's just going to quite frankly, it's just going to make people a little bit more aware. At least I hope it's going to make people a little bit more aware, and there'll be less dates of birth on the internet, and there'll be less people's, favorite pet's name on the internet, which is really their password. So hopefully it's like that, and then it just becomes a natural partnership where us as the data stewards and the trusted partners are there to help the customer. That's my hope, at least.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Very good. And Sylvia, I think there's a couple things that we talked about, and one of them is what are the top 3 risk management trends in privacy and data protection? This is really your wheelhouse.
Okay. Well,
what do you think?
This is going to be fun. And then, Deborah, I want you to sort of say yay or nay, okay? You're the one who's actually left to operationalize everything that's happening in market. So, I mean, I just advise, you've got the real tough job of owning the privacy risk exposures and the problem. So I would say the first market trend that comes up time and time again, and it's not different every year, so I'm going to say it again. The regulatory privacy landscape is continuously in flux, and it's constantly evolving, and it hasn't stopped. And we had GDPR 2 years ago. We've got Bill 64 in Quebec. We've got the feds promising us amendments to the PIDA, and we're seeing all sorts of regulatory pronouncements that have GDPR-like provisions, signaling that GDPR is going to heavily influence the way privacy risk management programs should be set up and run. And really the implication here is that the standard for privacy protection is only increasing, right? There is a higher bar more than ever. And so the lesson there is that organizations who used to resort to excusing themselves from having to comply with a higher standard in one jurisdiction, especially if they are global in scope and operations, they can't really do that anymore, because they're going to have to adhere to a higher standard uniformly across their operations. And I actually think that's a good news story, because Deborah, you talked about, digital first and the customer experience and meeting customer expectations to be able to earn and maintain that trust, so that they don't question your policies and your procedures, and they actually end up giving you more information because they trust that as a custodian of that data, you're going to protect that and do what you say. So I would say that it actually instills more customer confidence in the fact that there is a streamlined approach to risk management and privacy compliance, and it offers up that true digital experience where the customer expects that no matter where they do their shopping or where they go, their privacy rights are going to be respected in the same way, right? So that's the first trend. Yay or nay?
Yay.
Yay?
Absolutely,
Okay.
a definite yes.
All right. The second trend is we're seeing a huge uptake in migrations into the cloud. So privacy risk management for the cloud and understanding your vendors and how they're going to pledge their privacy commitments to you in order for the custodian or data controller, whatever jurisdiction you operate, to be able to demonstrate compliance with their legal obligations. That's going to be more costly, and it's going to be top of mind. Migrations to the cloud is actually a good thing, simply for the cost reasons. However, cross-border data transfers are becoming more and more complex, given the recent activity in Europe with the European Court of Justice invalidating the traditional safe harbor and privacy shield data transfer mechanisms to have companies certify that they're actually privacy compliant. And so you also have lots of jurisdictions still with data localization rules that you need to be mindful of, like China, Russia, India, Brazil. And so this is going to, in effect, make it a little bit more difficult when you're making extreme large investments in new infrastructure and technologies to do greater due diligence and to work closely with your vendors to demonstrate, a good privacy hygiene. And you're going to have to probably include what I call some geo-flexibility when making this all work, because you're going to have to start thinking about developing contractual measures and put binding corporate rules into place, which often involve, legal counsel, and it gets a little bit costly. So that's another trend that I'm seeing. I'm not saying it's insurmountable. It just means more cost and energy is going to be required to start thinking about that a bit differently.
Are standard contractual clauses and binding corporate rules going to suffice? Because from I understand, for example, in the U.S., when data resides there, there's actually a law that says that the U.S. can come in and take that data. It's called the Patriot Act, and you could have standard contractual obligations that you've signed, but at the end of the day, you don't have any control. So you actually can't sign those standard contractual clauses or binding corporate rules because you can't live up to it in some jurisdictions. So, I did a lot of I read just about everything I could on this.
But
they just drove a train through it.
Right. So, is the answer to never store your data in the U.S. because, with the political climate and the uncertainty and the lack of an omnibus federal privacy law that actually, provides adequate protection for EU data to live there and reside there. Is the answer never store your data in the U.S.? I don't know. Who's going to answer that question on this call? Because it's 1:51, and that could be a
we could do a whole session on this one. Yeah. Exactly. So what's your third?
The third, okay.
What's your third risk? Sorry, I interrupted you.
There's many trends, but these are my top three, I guess. Privacy engineering approaches to compliance and risk management. I think there is a different mindset in terms of privacy by design. Deborah, I know you said, privacy by design, no one's questioning the need for it. Everyone understands value, and I know that in Europe it's already been legislated, but I think I'm seeing more and more of privacy by design implementation approaches that require that hybrid approach that we talked about: technology, people, process, and governance all coming together, and RFPs and vendors coming and asking, or telling us they're going to start building in security default functionality into the architecture. So that is already happening, and it's more popular than ever. But I think the trick is to do more than just, put up a policy statement and, build privacy enhancing functionality into system architectures, I think it's really important to understand process and build in process, because I think the what is important. Yes, the policy says, this is what we do, but it's how things are going to get rolled out and implemented. And what's critical to this is increased training, awareness, and change management to support all of that. Because none of it will actually take off and foster and inspire, a privacy-first mindset. You talked about that as well, Deborah. You said a customer-first mindset, I think, means a privacy-first mindset. None of that will happen effectively if the tone from the top isn't there to affect cultural change and to have a change management and training and a process in terms of how things will be implemented, adopting that privacy by design approach. So privacy is really becoming less of a compliance topic and more of a business issue. I would say it's more of a technology issue than anything else, especially with the digital transformation that was expedited by COVID. And all the naysayers who said, well, we can't do that in digital, well, guess what? We have all of KPMG on Teams, and that happened overnight, right? So it's a mindset thing, right? When push comes to shove, yes, we can. Digital transformation is here, it's here to stay, and privacy is top of mind when it comes to that.
It's interesting because in companies, I think for leaders in companies and at the high level, we've talked a little bit about privacy and security are integral and they go hand in hand, but it's easy for leaders to understand cyber and security because don't let someone hack you. Don't let viruses get on your network. That's sort of an easy concept, but there's so much gray in privacy, and there's so much that's sort of, constantly in flux because of maybe it's regulation or it's contractual agreements with your vendors. It's a lot harder for senior leaders to understand in some organizations. I'm not saying all organizations, but just to understand privacy and how it's different, because privacy is a subset of security, but then there's also the privacy that's got nothing to do with cyber. So, the employee errors that may create a privacy issue, a compliance issue, or just the human interactions. And then on top of that, it's the whole, you're developing a program with privacy, and it's and again, it depends on the laws, because in some laws there is no gray. In Canada, there's a lot more gray in PIPEDA. And I'm not saying that, I think PIPEDA is a great law. Could it use updating and modernization? Sure, but I think it is a good law for privacy as a baseline. And, we don't want to lose a leadership edge by falling significantly behind other jurisdictions, but there's a lot more gray in privacy than cyber because don't get hacked.
It's also, I think, because it's a lot harder to quantify privacy than it is security, because privacy is more about policy, people, and process and governance, whereas security is traditional, the technology, and you can quantify that a bit easier. But make no mistake, leadership teams will look to quantify and understand the value that they're getting on their privacy spend. And I would say, Deborah, also that just like there's a convergence between cyber and privacy, the new up-and-coming trend, that's trend number 4, Derek, is the convergence between data governance and privacy, right? Yeah. Because in order to protect your information assets, you need to understand where your data assets live.
Yeah.
Right? And that requires data mapping and data lineage and understanding metadata. And then in turn, you can prove the legal authority for using the data in the way it's supposed to be used, because I see a lot of companies struggling with inappropriate use of data simply because they don't have the requisite legal authority to use that information for broader secondary purposes. And it's exorbitantly expensive to go and reconsent all of the existing clients in that database, right? So they're left to their own devices to anonymize data sets, right? And in order to anonymize, you need to know what data you have. So a lot of data mapping, a lot of data lineage, which actually creates the transparency required in privacy law. So that's why I say there's a massive convergence between data governance and privacy. The two really go hand in hand.
And then you throw in access controls and retention, and then you basically, that's your life. Right. It's just mapping data.
That's right.
One of the themes that we're hearing today through the privacy conversation and compliance conversation, and I know you are a real disciple, Sylvia, of privacy by design, and talked about privacy or trust by design.
Right.
That's kind of her new thing, right?
It's a new buzz in privacy, right? First it went from accountability to, I think it was a privacy by design, then it's trust by design, trust is ultimate, and all those words have very special meaning, and I wholeheartedly believe in it. But I would also add to it that ethics is playing a huge role in risk management and compliance. And I would start off by saying that you can't regulate ethics, okay? And the simple answer is because ethics is based on values and cultural beliefs that shape the way the government and our society thinks, acts, and does, and also legislates things. And just look at the way privacy is approached in North America versus in the EU, right? One's more of a consumer protection approach versus in Europe. It really is a cherished privacy right,
yes.
Right? And so that said, I think ethics is significant in risk management simply because of the role it has to play, let's say, in COVID. So let's consider the debate around contact tracing apps and the complexity of the ethical conversation and the debate that needs to take place around notice, transparency, ethical use of that data, retention of it, and what happens, not so much what happens today with that kind of tracing, because we're doing it for public good, right? We want to be healthy and safe, but what happens long term? Because that's a treasure trove of data. If not checked in terms of, what's going to happen with it later down the road, I think there's a significant risk of us losing our foundational privacy rights. So I would say that ethics is really important in terms of tone from the top, and also, how behaviors, certain behaviors in companies and attitudes and organizational commitments are embedded so that the laws that speak to at a very high level things like transparency, fairness, consent, openness, accountability is actually measured through law, but it really is operationalized through codes of ethics and policies around that. And I would say that it starts with the leadership and setting the tone from the top to really demonstrate that what you say you're going to do with the data is actually being done with that data. So again, remember I said policy statement, great, but process, right? How do you actually deal with the data? And another trend number 5, Derek, I'm seeing a lot of companies come up with not only just ethical codes, but a responsible and ethical use of the data, in the absence of the right consent or anonymization techniques that take longer to implement.
Yeah, very good.
A lot.
You guys have been fantastic, and I know we've just scratched the surface. So, as Bashir said, we would love to interview each of you with the remainder of these questions, and maybe digging a little deeper into these on an individual basis, and we'll follow up with you in the near future. So thank you very much. You guys have been awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks very much, both Sylvia, Deborah, and of course Derek. You guys added some pretty powerful stuff, and you put meat on the table for us to take it to the next step now, which we will, I promise you. So thanks a lot. Fantastic. Appreciate that. And we will do that one-on-one as well. So 1 second here.